All right, so bell ringer for today. We just watched the Truman Doctrine video I posted yesterday. So describe what the Truman Doctrine was. What did this doctrine intend to do? There we go. Use some time to work on that. What's up, Chikari? Yeah, go ahead. All right, so what was the Truman Doctrine?
Basically, it was a policy statement stated by the U.S. The U.S. to entry that created like communism, and then they would attack them up for
Yeah, good job. Good job. So the United States would aid any country that's threatened by communism, right? By the spread of communism to that area. So this is by, obviously supplying them with military weapons, supplies, armaments, and trying to help them out economically. So sending any type of investment over, business opportunities for these countries, and really to build up, right? And try to support their democracy, their republic, free elections. And the United States, okay, this is the first step of the United States really intervening at an international level, helping out these countries internationally, right, to try to stop this spread of communism. So if there's any threat to that area, let's say in Greece and Turkey, like we talked about yesterday, the Mediterranean crisis, these countries will be supported by the United States. And how much money did Truman send to these two countries in the Mediterranean? Cody?
100.
400 million. Yep, 400 million. Good job. So that was the Truman Doctrine, right? So he's going to help any country to try to resist communism in that country. So a lot of these countries after World War II going through some internal issues, civil wars, okay, to see what type of government would lead their people from here on out. Obviously, at the same time, they're receiving a lot of attention from the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union wanted to try to spread their influence as well. So it was either take your pick, right? Take your pick. So with that being said, in the Mediterranean, it was vital that the United States had some sort of influence in Turkey and Greece. Why? What was so important between those two countries? What was so important there? You guys remember? Chris?
First civil war with at one side the communism, other side.
Yeah, but what about trade? What about trade? Why was it so important right there with trade? What's that? Okay, all right, well, any type of item really, right? So there's a strait right between Turkey and Greece. That's right here, into the Mediterranean Sea, which allows for trade to Eastern European countries, right? To these countries in Asia, right? Wherever the Soviet Union could maybe spread their influence. So it's vital that the United States had some sort of bottleneck on that, right? Had some sort of ownership of that area. Okay, the Turkish Strait is what they called it. So if they can control that strait, they can control trade to the Mediterranean Sea. Does that make sense? So if they can stop any items, if they can stop any type of resources leaving the Soviet Union to try to support these Eastern European countries, and eventually, right, these countries out here in Asia, then they can maybe prevent the spread of communism. Okay, if they're not getting support, these countries from the Soviet Union, there's really no way communism could spread there, right? Okay, does that make sense? All right, good. And then finally, what does the Truman Doctrine lead to? What does that lead to? What did we go over yesterday towards the end of class? There was another plan that was presented. Jakari? Yeah, the Marshall Plan. Good job. And what did that do?
Gave $13 billion to Western Europe to provide food, fuel,
Yeah, good job. Good job. So the only way we can maybe inspire some of these other countries in Eastern Europe to change sides, to accept democracy, to accept capitalism, and free elections, is to show them exactly what the United States has in our own country, right? To inspire them a higher standard of living. Okay, give them the opportunities for business, for growth, for capital gains. Okay, and the only way to do that is really invest $13 billion. That's a lot of money, right? To Western Europe to try to rebuild these countries after World War II. Okay, there's a lot of destruction there, obviously, especially in France, Western Germany. Okay, there's a lot of destruction there. And even in Belgium and Netherlands, Luxembourg, right? So it's important that the United States invests a lot of money, a lot of capital in these areas to try to build them up, try to rebuild after World War II. And if the Eastern European countries saw this benefit, saw this economic growth, saw this higher standard of living, maybe this might push for some rebellions, civil war in Eastern Europe. Okay, so you guys see how that works, right? So we're not sending troops and soldiers over. We're not sending any type of military conflict to go up head to head against the Soviet Union. We're doing this through different types of investments. We're spreading our influence through economic means, okay, and hoping that these other countries would see this benefit, this economic means, and economic benefits in Western Europe, and hopefully that spreads to Eastern Europe. Okay, so that's why they call it the Cold War. If that makes sense, guys. So Cold War is that we're not going head to head right against the Soviet Union. We're actually doing so through influence, through different means. Okay. All right. So here are the terms for today. All right, like I said, I'll try to get to this Chinese Civil War towards the end of class. I want to get you working on the Marshall Plan reading. I want to give you enough time to work on that so you don't have any homework for today. But Domino Effect, NATO, Warsaw Pact, and Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong. I'm sure you heard about him before. Mao Zedong. So usually I have a whole lesson on the Chinese Civil War, but we're just going to kind of streamline it, keep moving through the class, keep moving through the Cold War, so we have enough time towards the end of the year to get through modern times. All right, so domino effect, that's very, very important when we talk about the Truman Doctrine and when we talked about the Marshall Plan. And NATO, the Warsaw Pact, these are two, I guess, say alliances that are forming right at the end of World War II. And then Mao Zedong. Oh, last bulletin board too. Just changed that yesterday. Rocky and Ivan Drago up there fighting in the right-hand corner. You see that? If only Colin was here to see that. He loves Rocky, doesn't he?
You hear about it all day, every day.
Yeah, he talks about. You're gonna have to tell him about it.
Yeah, I'm sure that I do.
All right, thanks, Cody. Domino effect. What do we have for the domino effect? Andrew, what do you have, buddy?
A domino effect or chain reaction is the cumulative effect produced when one event sets off a chain of similar events.
Yeah, good job. Good job. And this is how they describe the spread of communism at the end of World War II. So once one country falls, it's inevitable, really, until another country falls, until another country, communism spreads to another country. So we're going to talk about that today, especially with China. Okay, 1949, they go through a civil war, and obviously communism is accepted there. And even still today, the People's Republic of China, which is not a republic, it's a strict leadership there. Okay, and with that being said, North Korea will fall to communism. All right, Vietnam will fall to communism. Okay, and this was a fear in Europe that if Greece, Turkey fall to communism, this will just continue on, and the spread of communism would be never ending. Does that make sense, guys? All right. So they use that term as a way of describing once a domino, like we know in dominoes, when you stack them all in a row, once one country falls, another one will probably fall. All right, NATO. What is NATO? What is that? Autumn, what do you have for NATO? You didn't get there yet? Oh, sorry about that. All right. Haley Ryder, what do you have for?
The North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
Yeah, good job, NATO. Good. North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And we'll talk about this more today, but this is a treaty, an alliance with the Western European powers and the United States. Okay? And with NATO, their goal is to try to protect these Western European powers. The United States is trying to do that, trying to protect them from this spread of communism. And still alliance today, actually. So this alliance is still around today. And if there's ever any type of attack on one of the NATO members, that means that all the members in NATO will come together and fight the opposition. Okay? And that's one concern, especially today, right? With Russia approaching into Ukraine, into Turkey, right? Okay. So even in current events, there's a lot of issues along that border, the Russian-Ukraine border. And if, let's say, they would attack the Ukraine, let's say they would attack Turkey, right? So that means all these countries involved with NATO will go to war with Russia, okay? Does that make sense? That's a big fear, right? It's a big fear. That's something obviously no one wants to happen. But with that treaty organization, that keeps countries like Russia in check, right? And make sure that if they start some sort of invasion or start this war, that all these countries would pit against them. And it's a great way to try to keep these countries, these belligerent countries, aggressive countries, in check. All right, what about the Warsaw Pact? What do we have? Warsaw Pact. Shikari, go ahead.
Elective defense treaty established by the Soviet.
Yeah, good job. Good job. So this is really an effect of NATO, right? So the Warsaw Pact was formed. It was a treaty alliance with the Soviet Union and the Eastern European countries, okay? So where they spread their influence in Europe after World War II. So let's face it, a lot of these Eastern European countries, they weren't too well developed, right? They weren't too strong. They didn't really have a strong economy or military in that case, but they're supported by the Soviet Union. So that means let's say if any country in Western Europe tried to attack Eastern Europe, that means all these countries and the Soviet Union would go to war with them, okay? And again, this was an effect of NATO. The Soviet Union needed some sort of treaty alliance with other countries in case war would happen, okay? And this wouldn't happen until 1955, all right? So 1955, the Warsaw Pact was created. NATO was pretty much right at the end of World War II, all right? All right, Mao Zedong, what do we have here? Ethan, go ahead. Yeah, good job. Good job. So he's pushing for this communistic government in China at the end of World War II. So he's really the leader that brings communism to China. Right? And whenever they bring up China in the news, whenever you look at many of their political buildings, that's who you see, Mao Zedong. Okay, he's the founder of communism that pushed for this movement in China at the end of World War II. It was interesting, like I said, when Japan invaded China, this civil war was already going on since the 20s, 1920 or so, 1925, 1927, 1925 to 1927. The civil war is going on, and Japan invades them. They decide to join sides and fight off Japan. Then after the war, immediately they start fighting each other again, right? To see what type of government they would have in China. It was unbelievable, but well, that's how it goes, I guess. All right, so moving on today. All right, so we just got done talking about containment, right? And whose policy was that again? Whose policy of containment? So President Truman, his idea was to try to contain communism. That's his policy. So make sure you guys remember that, right? Make sure you remember that. Eisenhower's going to have a different policy, but containment's still going to be used, still going to be utilized, okay? And containment is trying to make sure they can keep a cap on communism, make sure that it doesn't spread anymore. All right, so the Cold War alliances, like I mentioned, pretty much right at the end of World War II, the United States is looking to build an alliance with these Western European countries. So 1949, it was really pushing the United States to have some sort of relationship, some sort of treaty to protect these Western European countries. And this was a great idea, especially to try to keep the Soviet Union at bay. Right? If the Soviet Union tries to invade any of these Western European countries to spread communism, this would result in a war. Okay? And there's 12 Western European countries involved with that, and the United States. So already, that looks pretty lopsided, right? All these countries coming together to fight the Soviet Union. Well, that's what exactly it was we tried to do. We tried to establish with this treaty to make sure the Soviet Union was kept in check. So 1949. And really, this follows suit as China is becoming communistic, right? So as China is becoming communist, becoming a communist country, it was up to the Western European countries and the United States to try to establish a strong treaty, a strong alliance to make sure communism doesn't spread in Europe. Because as Asia is really unfolding into red, as communistic, they want to make sure that this doesn't happen in Europe. All right, so to counteract that, the Soviets decided, well, we need to have some sort of alliance. And right around 1953 is when Stalin dies. Okay, so Stalin dies, and I'll talk about him a little bit later, but Khrushchev comes into play. And really, they try to de-Stalinize the Soviet Union, even though they're still pitted against the United States, even though they're still having a rivalry with the United States. They wanted to try to de-Stalinize the Soviet Union. One of the main reasons for that was because how brutal Stalin was. Okay, how authoritarian type of style of government he had. And we know the gulags, we know the 5-year plans, how brutal it was to their own people. Okay, so they wanted to try to get rid of that, obviously, in the Soviet Union. So Stalingrad, that storied battle in World War II, the turning point. They changed that city name to Volgograd to try to eliminate the Soviet Union from Stalin's leadership, even though he built them into a world power, a superpower. The Soviet Union tried to separate themselves from his authoritarian leadership. All right, to counteract that, though, in 1955, the Warsaw Pact was created. So all Soviet and other communist states promised to defend each other if attacked. Right? If attacked. And, like I mentioned, these Eastern European countries would follow suit. Okay, so Poland, Eastern Germany, right? All the way up until the border of the Soviet Union. And China, North Korea. Right? North Korea and China, which we'll talk more about tomorrow with the Korean War. All right, so the Warsaw Pact versus NATO. That's really what we see towards the end of World War II, moving into the 1950s. These two alliances making sure they can protect their own interests in Europe and in Asia. All right, real quick, so the Civil War in China, okay, right at the end of World War II, well, even before that, really in the 1920s, China was going through a civil war, and it was democratic versus communist, right? Mao Zedong led this communist revolution, I guess you could say, and to try to push this democracy out of China. And he had a lot of followers, a lot more than what we saw with the Nationalistic Party, okay, with the democratic side of it, okay? And Mao Zedong eventually would obviously take leadership, and communist China would be created. But it was interesting. Like I said, this happened in the 1920s. They continued all the way up until 1937 when Japan invaded China, right? And we talked about that already with World War II. And throughout World War II, these two sides actually came together and they tried to fight off the Japanese invaders. And this whole time, even though they were fighting together, they both were planning and strategizing their attack on one another once this war would end. So even when they're fighting together against Japan, they're pitting and planning and maybe coming up with strategies to try to take down the other opposition. It was interesting, right? It's like, oh, you got to watch your back at all times in China during that time. But right after World War II was over, right after Japan was pushed out of China, Mao Zedong and the Communist Party, okay, they would later win the Civil War. So the Civil War really lasted 1920s all the way up into 1949 at the end of World War II. It never stopped. It never ended. I guess you could say the two sides came together to push out the Japanese invaders, but overall, this Civil War continued for a long period of time. All right, so that's where we see it today. China is still communistic, and many of the democratic forces the Democratic side of it, went to Taiwan. Okay, I'm sure you guys hear about Taiwan a lot in the news. Taiwan's a small little island off the coast of China. It's right here, guys. So that's where Taiwan's at. And that is democracy. That has capitalism. It's supported by the United States and Japan today. Okay? And there's a lot of tensions occurring right now in Taiwan. There's a lot of violence, a lot of aggression by the Chinese over the Taiwan airfields into the waters of Taiwan. And there's a fear that maybe there will be a war between these two countries. Because China, communist China, believes that it can still control Taiwan, that it's just a part of China when it's really not. Okay, there's two separate entities. All right, so again, that's a huge fear today. And that's definitely in current events a lot, in the news a lot, talking about Taiwan and these increased tensions with China. And what might happen if these two might go to war. If they do, obviously the United States and Japan would back Taiwan, and China would, I really don't know who would support them at that moment. I think people say Russia. I'm not sure about that. I don't think so. What's up, Chris?
Where did the Portuguese go again? I mean, I went to Taiwan, but I forgot. The Portuguese go to Taiwan and Macau.
The Portuguese?
Yeah,
Well, like an age of exploration.
yeah, they went to one of them. I forgot which one.
Oh, I'm not sure, man. I'm not sure about
I
that.
know the British went to Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the Portuguese either went to Macau or Taiwan. I don't know.
Yeah. All right, so there's a reading for you.